Welcome back to the Fat Man's revisitation of the Twilight 2000 game system produced by Game Designers Workshop. This particular module is called The Last Submarine. The first in a trio of interconnected modules, the middle being Mediterranean Cruise, which I've either misplaced or misfiled. It's located someplace I can't find it, or I never bought it, and I find that hard to believe. Was pretty vigilant about, once I got into a system back in the day, of buying everything that came out. Now, maybe it was an item that didn't make it to my local game store, but that also was kind of rare at the time. Then the third one is called Boomer, and I have that, and I'll be reviewing that here in the near future. Basically here, our characters have followed through going home at some point. Either they came home on one of the ships, or they came home through an indirect method from other alternate methods from traveling. They may have gone on to do some more adventures in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe or Europe. The King's Ransom comes to mind, and the RDF source book for Iran also comes to mind, both of which I have not yet reviewed. The gist of it is, they get back, they discover that the States is a quagmire of messes. It hit pretty hard in several nuclear exchanges with Russia. At some point, the Mexican military has invaded the Southwest and has caused a lot of problems down there. There's border disputes along the Canadian border, mostly amongst the civilians. The governments themselves pretty much are in survival mode. And within the borders, we see some states that are succeeded, one or two who are notorious for doing that sort of thing because of their strong sense of independence. But we won't want to start a bunch of arguments over that one, like my last video did, do we? So many sensitive people today. Meanwhile, keeping in mind that these were written 40 years ago in the 80s under the premise of what if this shit hit the fan in the year 2000 and the years leading up to it, and World War III broke out. As we knew it, the political neo-economic situations of the 80s were in play. Not today's standards, not today's modern view of things, not today's social or moral or economic philosophies. Those didn't exist. It wasn't, by our definition today, this is an alternate history. Please keep that in mind. But meanwhile, absolutely feel free to make your comments. I welcome your comments. I will not disparage anybody who comments regardless of their personal views or their political views or what have you. Meanwhile, I'm sorry if some people were offended by how Europe turned or Britain turned out, but I hate to pull your chain, Chuckles. It's just tough luck. Y'all think somehow it's not going to roll that way if the world falls to pieces? We'll never know, because we won't likely survive to sit there around and write about it. Meanwhile, in here in the United States, we see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of militia groups and cults and neo-religions spring up and carve out little fiefdoms and kingdoms. Certain areas are under the control of the civilian government. Others are under the control of the military government. Their forces clash in a low-level era of civil war, trying to control things and control resources. Meanwhile, half the population or over half the population died in nuclear exchanges, and more have died since then in the starvations and depredations of their fellow Americans. America is a hot mess. America is a hot mess in the year 2001 when this takes place. And by all means, Americans bitch and moan and cry at me about how somehow I didn't get the picture. Like I wrote this thing. There you go. Tough titty, as they say it. Excuse my French. Meanwhile, the premise here being is somehow or another, this local would-be warlord has gotten himself his hands on a Los Angeles class attack submarine and managed to get it functional. And the government, or the entities who are employing the characters, particularly would like to get it back from them, or get it from them, and prevent them from this particular individual and his minions from using it to control most of the northeastern seaboard. Whereas the individuals in control of it want to keep it for that very same reason. So, we get our introduction, which basically tells you what I just told you. The story centers around a group of characters attempting to recapture the SN-705 city of Corpus Christi, the Los Angeles class fast attack nuclear submarine advantaged in the later stages of the war. The process of locating the cell, the players will run up against the typical tin-pot dictator and will need to thwart his plans of conquest in order to accomplish the mission. Information presented in this module includes blah 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 blah. So, we get our overview of the adventure. The last submarine is set in New England and centered around the last operational American submarine. Depending on the results and sequence of previous campaigns and adventures, the characters can be introduced in this campaign from anywhere along the eastern seaboard or the Gulf Coast of the United States, or overland from inland locations. The precise sequence of events by which the players arrive in New London is up to the referee. Chronologically, it is intended to set up a period between 1 January and 1 March of 2001. Play adventure has been divided into 6 parts called sessions, provided to allow the referee to control and plan the length of each period of play. The section of the module. So ideally, you could play this module out in 6 to 12 game sessions, maybe less. But if you follow the criteria of a session per game, or a game session per gaming session, you'd be about 6 weeks if you're meeting once a week. The mission, the Sea Wolves. Says the heavy loss in naval tonnage in late 96, as mentioned in the chronology of the basic rules, was not limited to surface vessels. Nice map of the Northeast, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts. Forces only. The submarine forces of all nations also suffered heavily. By the start of 97, the total number of operational NATO subs was down to 19, of which 15 were the U.S. Navy. 8 of these boats were based in New London, Connecticut, with Submarine 9, otherwise known as Submarine Squadron 9, nicknamed the Sea Wolves. Most of the boats assigned to the Sea Wolves were dedicated to anti-submarine warfare. Duty was long and more dangerous than the crews have been told. Soviet subs proved to be very difficult to locate, and attrition was high. On 26 April 97, the last known Soviet submarine in the Atlantic was sunk. The mission of Submarine 9 was changed to advanced scouting for the Second Fleet. The cost was high, and only 4 submarines remained operational after mid-May. In early June, these last 4 operational boats left New London for the Kola Peninsula. Fleet action off from the Monks was widely publicized as a decisive victory for NATO, but the family members of the sailors who didn't come back thought otherwise. Of the 4 boats that went out, only 2 returned. The Newport News and the Corpus Christi, battered and bruised, both spent the rest of 97 in New London dry dock, where they were when the first nuclear bombs fell in November. New London was not bombed. January of 1998, the Newport News surrendered her berth and left New London for the last time. Corpus Christi wasn't badly needed at sea, but she was due for a reactor overhaul, and the Navy, at the last minute, as usual, picked Corpus Christi to receive new sonar and computer suites. The work kept dragging on until late fall, mostly because of the holdups of crucial material and technical support. Even the highest priority attached to the work, the destruction of the national transportation net, destruction of the national power generation grid, and the resulting industrial dislocation and civil unrest caused considerable delays. Finally, notice came that the equipment was ready for shipment from Boston to bulky be transported, blah, blah, blah. That says, the day before a cargo ship was due to arrive at the base, there was a major disturbance at the main gate by starving locals looking for food. On the morning of a cargo ship's arrival, the disturbance turned into a human wave attack at the rumor that the freighter contained grain from the Midwest. The base, the cargo ship, and the Corpus Christi were all overrun, and token security forces and base personnel were driven out or massacred. The overworked 43rd Military Police Brigade was unable to regain control of New London. The culprit. The information should not be revealed to the characters. The Corpus Christi is stolen by John Carlucci's United Brotherhood of Fishers, or UBF. Carlucci is a local union leader and politician and is to make use of submarine and his efforts to achieve dominance on the eastern seaboard. There you have it. So, in the course of the adventure, your group is joined by 2 naval officers who are NPCs, both of which have some experience in submarines. The captain himself is experienced at commanding Los Angeles-class submarines. Says 2 naval officers accompany the group will emphasize the need to regain control of Gorton submarine base in order to refit the Corpus Christi when the time comes. They will also want to contact the leader of the 43rd MP Brigade for assistance in this. Players can proceed with these missions as they see fit, but it will soon become obvious that the 43rd will be no help to them. The base, as it will transpire, will not be needed either. Excuse me. It's become evident that Carlucci has refitted the submarine on his own, and the players will only need to take it from him. But first of all, however, the players will undoubtedly want to scout around New London to see if anyone knows where the stuff went. They will learn about Father O'Grady, the Catholic priest. They will undoubtedly want to travel to Boston and talk to the priest. Players will eventually uncover Carlucci's plan, the location of the submarine, and other details relevant to their mission. The adventure will accumulate in the players retaking the Corpus Christi and upsetting Carlucci's plans for power. So, basically, Carlucci was a union head or union rep with some Italian backgrounds and attachments to or contacts within the Italian mafia that's prevalent in the northeastern regions of the United States. In the 80s, they were much more prevalent and noticeable than they are today. And he has gained control and set up his own little kingdom, especially centered around New London and Groton. So, the city and town of New London, located southeastern Connecticut, blah, 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 talks about the history of the city, talks about counter results, exploration of rumors. Personalities. Michael Stacks. So Lieutenant Commander Michael Stacks, U.S. Navy, is NPC, intend to take over command of Corpus Christi. His motivations. Paul McDonald is another NPC intended to help operate Corpus Christi. And now we go on to the UFB. This section introduces characters in the United Brotherhood of Fishermen. Characters need the UFB to secure transport to Boston if they have chosen to go there and rescue Father O'Grady from the Dangerous. In the process, they will be given access to rumors which will enable them to learn about the submarine, the UBF's activities on Cape Cod, which will enable them to guess where the Corpus Christi is located on the island of Nantucket. Meeting the UBF, Martha's Vineyards, Carlucci's Marines for the UBF, Cape Cod Canal, Cape Cod itself, nice little maps, Fisher Boat. Counter revolves the cranberry patch. Stay out of the cranberry patches. Apparently, the locals don't take kindly to you. Characters will come across a large cranberry patch, so they choose to pick some of those cranberries, which is delicious. There's a 90% chance that the enraged owners will appear wielding shotguns and force them to pay the outrageous amount for them. If the characters protest, they will be arrested and fined. If the characters have this encounter before, treat this as an encounter with locals. So, it could be a reoccurring theme. Stay away from the cranberries. Because Cape Cod is the heartland of the empire that John Clancy has carved out for himself. Peace and public order are the rule all along the peninsula. The area is no longer under curfew, and the movement of armed civilians will attract little attention from the authorities. Population at Cape Cod is naturally suspicious of strangers, and any newcomers to the region will be met with a barrage of semi-hostile questions. And we says, who are those masked men? Why do they want torpedoes? The UBF has learned that there are 6 Mark 48 torpedoes located in Old Naval Depot at Weymouth, and a raid to steal these weapons from the gang that controls the area is planned. Okay. One of the ways that the game recommends the PCs proceed is to choose to join the UBF Marines. They will then be transferred to one of the Marine base camps on each end of the Cape Cod Canal, where they would be put to work with one of the regular foot patrols of the canal region. Doing so basically gives them an in. They would be able to operate semi-anonymously, following, quote, patrol orders and so on and so forth, with some legitimacy based off of being Marines of the UBF. Apparently, it's not uncommon for the UBF leadership to take on new people with especially experienced former military types and trust them enough to give them that kind of freedom to run around, which kind of seems counterproductive for the defense side of things, but you know. It says here, upon arrival, characters will be taken on a tour of the base, nearby guard towers. Here's a picture of one of the camps. During a few days of stay at the camp, each member will hear a rumor, consult the rumor table at the end of the section. One of the prime foes through this book is a series of street gangs. For all intents and purposes, local punks and kids who survived the Holocaust and were already some sort of gang-related mindset prior to the war, and it's just have banded together for mutual protection and so on and so forth. Amongst them is one called Dane Dangerous. He's actually a member of a punk rocker band that rocked into some fame in the Boston area and was running into headlong problems with the Boston police and authorities before the bombs fell. And they talk about some of that in here later. So here's an opportunity to knock out a small group called the Black Widows and regain some torpedoes. Boston Warehouse. So the characters who move directly to Boston will be given an opportunity to trade with the UBF's Boston Warehouse. This facility is a very large, heavily guarded building from which the UBF farmers or fishers trade their catches for goods on the games have salvaged from the remains of Boston. Background for the UBF. United Brotherhood of Fishermen is based on the remnants of the powerful workers' unions which were active along the Massachusetts and Rhode Island coastlines before the war. A variety of resources along the coast, including a few former Coast Guard stations and lighthouses on around Cape Cod, are under control of the UBF. They control these areas through the use of substantial private army and light naval force. Almost every New England coastal community has a UBF outpost. The largest of these outposts being the complexes maintained in Boston are the largest. It's missing an L. Okay. There's a lot of like typos in these older game books and stuff. They were more prevalent than they are now. This was, we were just getting into having large scale use of computers and word processors and stuff. We still see these typos crop up. This one might be a printing error because there's a space there, but it obviously didn't get caught. Master of all these surveys. So we talk about John Colucci, who was a prominent Boston lawyer, elected head of the UBF, backed by the Boston mob. 2 years out of the investigation, never revealed evidence, blah, blah, blah. Talk about how he went through, gained power, and become the obsessive nut job he is now. Food fight, writing from the Papas didn't forget food was available at UBF warehouses, keeping them under siege almost night and day. The largest UBF warehouse is located in the province of Boston. Hunger crazed mobs made human wave attacks, which forced, at the height of the food riots, if you will, forced the UBF defenders to be very harsh and has caused issues amongst the civilian population, especially the refugees, ever since. Home Sweet Home, to establish a safe area for the development of farming industry, Carlucci ordered Holmes to secure the isolated Cape Cod Peninsula. U.S. Submarine seized the Cape Cod Canal and several Coast Guard stations. So, they control most of the peninsula and the outer islands. Shipwright in the house, MP ambush, sighted sub, stole the same. Personalities: John Carlucci, Guido Mancini, Captain Thomas Holmes, which is the head of Carlucci's military or Marines, has a bit of he is an aging Vietnam veteran with little else to live for but the dubious glory of combat. This guy is known to occasionally go crazy in the middle of a fight and want to go mano a mano with whomever. And we get to a section on Boston, where it gives us the information of the city itself, rescuing Father O'Grady, some base information on the Boston gangs, truant days, terminal illness, rock at the top of the local music charts with a single, Truant Days among the song became the anthem for high school students, and by the end of the 95-96 school year, the number of high school dropouts in Boston had nearly doubled. So, it goes about the prehistory in this particular section on what went down and why this particular group of gangs and their leadership is the top of the pecking order. Talking about their headlong clashes with the authorities. The authorities attempt to frame them, and then their cover up. The situation blew out of control and out of hand, turned a big chunk of Boston into a battleground, and then the following year, aftermath and the Holocaust, Dane's continuing control of the more or less the streets. Confrontation with the police were still frequent, but they had less to do with culture suppression, more to do with street crime. Dane never recovered sufficiently to perform again, but he continued to write songs. Anger stemming from what had happened to him began to permeate his music. When the nuclear strikes fell and the collapse of the civilian government began, Dane seemed to rejuvenated somehow. Amidst the riots and other strikes and the civil unrest, terminal illness began to give impromptu street performances, sometimes with only the most primitive sound equipment, sometimes without instruments at all. Dane's new music was the saga of what was occurring in Boston, and like all songs, it had a moral. If only the gangs will survive. When the first of the gasoline riots occurred, the megaponents decided to add a little looting and arson to the list of crimes. Strangely coincident, the buildings and homes that were burned belonged to the old established leaders of the Boston area. So we see the changeover in the rulers and the ruling class, if you will, of Boston, and the old school, old established system is faded away and replaced by the street gang. Administrative level, to some degree, they've managed to hold their own. We got another group called the Razorheads, go into some depth on it. Obviously, your player characters are going to run into problems with these yahoos if they enter Boston or they're in the immediate vicinity of Boston for any reasons. Then we got encounters in the Razorhead turf, Boston itself, other gangs that you can run into. Then we got our personality section, Dane Dangerous. His sister, Amdistress, Griswold, Greasy Fellow, and other members of the mega punk rocker band that turned into a crime gangland syndicate, however you want to look at. Information here's Father John Allen O'Grady, his knowledge of what's going on out in Nantucket. And we have the section on the MPs. This section will bring the characters into contact with the remnants of the 43rd Military Police Brigade. Characters can arrive overland or sailing up the Connecticut River. It is possible that the characters will come Towards the beginning of the adventure, seeking the 43rd's assistance, recovering the Corpus Christi, they will soon discover the 43 is not an ally and may well be an enemy. Basically, the 43rd is seen a lot. They've suffered a lot in this situation. They were spread out through most of Rhode Island and New England to help maintain the local civil authorities maintain some semblance of control. When civil order broke down, and the bombs fell, things got worse. The military MP organization found themselves being beset by enemies on all sides and losing more than they gained. And at some point they fell back and regrouped and are now under the command of Colonel Fort and his mindset. It says here, otherwise they will not be allowed in unless they can demonstrate they will be of value to the 43rd if, for instance, they have combat experience or something to trade, such as weapons or equipment. Colonel Ford is not particularly interested in a submarine, and he will be unwilling to spare troops for an assault to recapture it. He is anxious to enlist the characters in his service, however, and will offer them work. This will not consist of anything exciting or rewarding, and basically a dead end. It will, however, enable Major Orwell to make contact with the characters if she has not already done so. Another map of central Massachusetts. The 43rd is, to some degree, carving out their own little fiefdom now. They maintain a base here. They have a fire base here, blockade, stockade here, controlling central Massachusetts. And then let's see, rescue, and at some point in the adventure there will be a mutiny among the troops of the 43rd. This occurred just about any time of the adventure, but it is best to plot purposes. It starts shortly after the players begin their plan to rescue Father O'Grady. If the characters have managed to keep O'Grady out of the hands of the MPs, but find themselves in the MP camp for some other reason, the referee must work out the mutiny into the plot somehow. This action will provide to remove the MPs from the serious consideration as an ally at whatever rate the players have in mind to recover the submarine. This here, Major Morgan has finally come to the conclusion that Colonel Ford must be removed from his commander of the 43rd MP Brigade. He has gathered a small force in which he intends to strike swiftly, remove the loyal to Fort, and replace them with his own people. Mutiny will start, blah, blah, blah. Typical internal backstabbing. So, information on the 43rd, more depth of detail. So the 43rd Military Police Brigade was the Rhode Island National Guard Brigade before the war. Personnel were experienced in a variety of military functions, police functions, and the unit's level of training equal to that to other units of the National Guard. So the brigade had been federalized in August in response to the worsening worldwide situation with the entry of NATO into the war. Short-term period of panic occurred in the United States. The sale of firearms, medical supplies, survival gear, tools, and canned goods skyrocketed. The New York Times poll showed that 76% of the American public thought there would be a nuclear war within 6 weeks. By January, shortages of survival-related durable goods were a national phenomenon. Steady decline with crime rate, particularly in the metropolitan areas, accompanied the hysteria. Local authorities were able to handle most of these disturbances at a time when no bombs fell on American soil. The panic settled to low-level tension. Shortage is 97. There's the long cold winter, cold darkness, hunger, pull-out, sell-out, the aftermath, further problems. Things have been pretty hairy back in the States while the adventurers have been fighting in Europe and surviving, and then after pretty much the collapse of the front in Europe, finding their way home, and they find their way home to another big quagmire mess. More information on the MP and their fort and their motivations and their current situation and what they have available to themselves, their locations, their outposts. Personalities of Colonel Dean Fort. major number of other NPCs. Then we get to Brit and the isolationist community. This is basically a local former governor of Rhode Island whose belief is that they need to look after themselves. The isolation group based on the province area. Leader is Stephen Brett, former governor of Rhode Island. Brett rallied the rabble to survive the first harsh winters, and after the nuclear strikes, and began the task of providing them with a secure future. The community is governed by the Council of 12 elders. These individuals decide all internal affairs by majority vote. Brett retains absolute control of all non-domestic issues, including command of the defense forces and negotiated trade agreements. Usually half the council members can usually be expected to vote according to Brett's instructions or on a given topic. As is expected from their name, the isolationist doctrine calls for just that, isolation. They are officially opposed to contact with any government or other organization outside their borders. They claim the boundaries of the former state of Rhode Island to be the limits of their domain, but effectively they are only control parts of Providence and the adjacent area bounded by the Providence and the Pawtucket rivers. They are closed by small bands of mega-punk gangsters within Providence itself and by the various bandit marauder bands which wander New England. And information about their patrols and firemen co-ops and bandits, counter results, files on Stephen Brett himself and his cronies and associates. The raid itself. So pretty much everything in the whole 6-session campaign, mini-campaign, is designed to lead up to the point where the player characters and their associates, allies, and or hangers-on will raid the Nantucket Island to get their hands on the submarine. Once they've gained control of it, it's made the assumptions that they're going to gain control of it. Commander Sachs and his crew take over the mission. Characters' part is finished. They may proceed to back to Norfolk and collect a reward. Reactivation of naval facilities in New England, blah, blah, blah. This is not the end of Carlucci, since oddly he will not be on Nantucket when the raid occurs. He now has a bone to pick with certain members of the characters should they ever return to his domain. So that leaves an open window for the possibility of following up. Hello. Yes. You can just wait your turn. And like I said, the player characters may be enticed or stuck aboard the Corpus Christi, which helps lead them into the next set of adventures that are connected to the submarine, or they might be tasked by their senior command officers to do so for reasons unyet known, or the group can break up and head to other situations, or they can continue adventuring and influencing or attempting to influence the politics and the economy situation and the survival situation of this particular corner of the states. That's an individual choice. Of course, there are several other modules that connect not to the submarine itself, but to the background material and Providence. There's one set in the Allegheny Mountains, which would be not far from here, geographically speaking, and could easily be a segue from the player characters moving from here further inland to deal with yet another set of situations and or crisis. So there you have it, the last submarine.